Part 1. Mission. Chapter 1. The Best Stars-Blasted Pilot. Kase. Rain beat a steady rhythm on Kase Shackley's leather jacket. After 3 years spent earning it, he wore it with his chest puffed out and his shoulders high as the moon's. Beowulf, Odysseus, and King Arthur, all heroes from ancient First Earth stories, had nothing on Kase's piloting skills. If they'd had hover technology, he knew he'd outstrip them by miles. With a small smile playing at his lips, Kase pulled the collar higher. Leading his hoverbike into the alleyway behind the hangar, he shook more water droplets from his dark brown curls and tugged down his pilot goggles. The buildings of stone and metal loomed over Kase like specters in the early evening. Dark clouds blotted out any chance of a decent sunset, though the gray light peeking through cast a pale glow on Kase's skin. Perfect weather for the usual induction ritual. No one other than the pilots would be out in it, of course, and as usual, Kase had already paid off the guards. The soft tut-tut-tut of the Yalvar fuel engine overpowered the rain. Kase swung one leg over the seat and pressed the button to lift the craft a foot off the mossy cobblestones below. Without a thought, he tightened his stomach and kept the bike upright. Easy. The technology keeping hover vehicles afloat wasn't new, but it was only in the last 20 years that the nation of Jade's Engineer Corps had untangled the secrets nearly lost to time. The rain's damp, earthy scent mixed with the smell of burning fuel as Kase sucked in another breath. Yes, this was the perfect night to show the new pilots who ran the airfields. A low rumble sounded from around the corner, and a grin tugged at the corner of his mouth. The fresh meat, Kase's first opponent, had arrived. It was the greenie pilot's stars-rotten luck to be going up against Kase his first day on the job, but that wasn't Kase's fault. All the dull cop had to do was swerve before the bike rammed him. Not difficult, even for the greenie. After his pompous words today, he was asking for a beating. The handbook states the speed of a hover should be considered when making a turn. If one wishes to do so, slow the speed of the hover and ease into the turn. He'd peed his pants when Kase made the next perfect turn at full speed 3 seconds later. How did Kase get stuck with such an uptight greenie to train? Bike fighting usually ended with at least one busted-up engine from the less experienced pilots scraping them against the hangar walls, but the machines were only a cheap practice tool anyway. New pilots crashed them all the time, trying to get a handle on the controls. Starting on the bikes made it easier to fly the larger airships, which were like the sleek spaceships the ancient peoples of First Earth used to soar among the stars before getting stranded on Yalvara without their fancy tech. Kase thumbed his nose and eyed his opponent. The greenie was fresh out of school, and one look at his thick gray trainee jacket had Kase rolling his eyes. He landed his bike, holding up a hand. Judging by how you've buttoned that jacket up to your ears, you have no blasted idea what you're doing, do you? The drizzle didn't dampen the echo of his voice on the hangar walls. We went over this earlier. The man was only 3 years Kase's junior, but at 18 the bloke's large brown eyes peeking out through the goggles made him appear much younger, though it didn't stop his tongue. Pilots must look professional, and leaving buttons undone makes us appear disheveled. Lead J said that... had Kase been that whiny and priggish when he was that age? Yeah, but J isn't here, is he? This is a contest of men, and you don't even remember how to turn on the hover components. According to the handbook, when preparing the bike or hover for use, one should first make certain all safety features are engaged. If one is unsure about one or all of the safety indicators... Kase shook his head and strolled over to the greenie's bike. His boots splashed in small puddles growing from cracks in the cobblestone. You don't need to explain it to me, just press that button there. "What are you doing, Kase?" came a gruff voice from the end of the alley. "Hurry up!" Case's ears caught the familiar, clipped Cavenna accent, and he rolled his eyes at the other senior pilot hovering on his own bike just a few feet away. The rest of the pilots had arrived only moments before, bikes rumbling. "Just because your greenie beat you in that training exercise yesterday doesn't mean you can rush me. I'm helping my greenie here with his bike." He winked at his opponent. "You'll be fine." "But according to Lead J, we shouldn't even be here." Kase reached over and pressed the hover button in the center of the handlebars. The new pilot nearly slid off the seat. "Whoa there! Tighten your abs and hold on." Kase caught his arm before he smashed his face into the ground. "And it's tradition. Legend says Jay started this little induction ritual of ours." The boy, because that's what he was, even if Jadian law considered him a legal adult, paled as he clenched the handles with a rock-crushing grip. He nodded, the goggles slipping down his face with rain and probably a good bit of sweat. "But what if I can't swerve in time?" "Pull up. No shame losing to the best." When Kase was sure he wasn't about to slide off again, he stepped back. "But what about the hover kernel? And what happens if I don't pull up or swerve?" He looked down the alley where more catcalls came from the assembled pilots. "All the training manual states is that—" "Good luck, Greenie." Kase jogged back to his bike, ignoring jeers coming from both sides of the alleyway. It was time for Kase to put on a show. Too bad this Greenie had to suffer for it. Pinpricks needled his chest and fingers as Kase lifted his bike into the air and revved the engine. The craft responded, vibrating under his fingertips. "Let's duel!" With a battle cry ripping from his throat, Kase darted forward, his bike's engine whining against the sudden speed. Rain and wind nipped at his uncovered hands as he roared down the alleyway toward the stationary Greenie. The fool hadn't moved forward. Was he giving up? "Pull up! Pull up!" Case's voice wasn't the only one screaming the words as he sped down the alley. "Pull up, you stars idiot!" "And what happens if—" The Greenie's nasally voice was just audible over the wind rushing in Case's ears. "What happens if we get caught?" At the last second, the Greenie yanked the handles toward his chest, whipping the bike straight into the air. The hover components screeched with the sudden force, shattering Case's concentration on his own bike. Greenie and machine roared over his head, the wind of their passing chilling Case's wet face. The bike climbed higher and higher, the Greenie still pulling on the control, until the bike flipped in midair, his feet flying over his head. With a deafening crunch, the Greenie landed on the neighboring hangar roof. The bike crashed at the end of the alley, judging by the other shouts and splintering shriek of metal on stone. Kase slammed his brake. The force threw him from his seat, and he rolled and skidded across the uneven cobblestone, the knee of his trousers ripping, but he didn't care. He was up and running toward the limp figure sliding off the edge of the roof. Not again! Heavens and stars, not again! As the body plummeted, Kase dove underneath it, catching the boy before his head slammed against the stone. "You reckless piece of... How many blasted times must I—" Kase knew by the lack of complete sentences that his father teetered at the edge of the abyss of his fury. Lord Capitan Harlan Shackley smoothed his steel-gray mustache and paced the private study of Shackley Manor, his polished black boots clacking with each step and squeaking with each turn. Kase tugged at his rain-soaked collar and winced. Though it would have made a good shield right about then, he'd left his jacket at the door. Focus on the shelves. Focus on the books. Focus on anything else. But nothing about the weathered spines, organized by height on the shelves flanking the large brick hearth, comforted him. Instead, all he saw was the broken, bleeding body in his arms. He'd shouted for the others to fetch a medic, while Kase administered what first aid he could, but that was his brother Zeke's specialty. Now, Kase was vastly more talented at screwing things up, just like the night his sister died in the fire. The gas lantern, sitting like a king on his father's desk, was the only illumination in the room. The Lord Capitan refused to have electricity in his own home, even if the lower classes also had the new technology. With each crackle, a flicker of light flitted over Kase's clenched fingers. After the crash, he'd told the rest of the pilots he'd take the blame for the night's events. He knew the hover lead wouldn't do anything to punish him. Kase never thought they'd bring his father, the supreme commander of the military, into it. Dealing with him on a good day was less than ideal, but late at night after a man was on the brink of death? Kase rubbed his shoulder and refused to look up. "It isn't my fault the greenie didn't pay attention in training." Harlan spun and kicked the leg of Kase's chair. It screeched across the floor an inch, and Kase gripped the arms as his father bent down. Exhaustion and exasperation warred in his sharp hazel eyes. "The boy nearly died because you didn't use your blasted head!" He stood, running a hand down his aging face. "After everything I've done." Kase gritted his teeth. "How was I supposed to know he'd yank the bike hard enough to send him into the stars? How'd he even test into the cruise in the first place?" Harlan's eyes flashed. "Trainee Lawrence Hickson had the highest scores on the written examination. They put him with you for a reason, even if you just earned your jacket. You were to be... but of course you..." His father marched toward his desk and snatched a piece of parchment. He held it up. "You know what this was?" Kase squinted at it, but the writing was too small and the lighting too dim to tell what it said. Harlan grasped it in both hands and ripped it, the pieces fluttering onto the desk and immaculate green carpeting. "Jove recommended you for a mission. Your brother and your hover lead think you're the best blasted pilot we have, yet you can't make the simplest decisions when your head isn't up in a hover." Jove had a mission for him? If Jove was heading it, the watch was involved. "Where were you sending me?" "Doesn't matter. You aren't mature enough to decide your next steps." Kase stood, his chair scraping back. "I didn't do anything." "You're facing charges that could lock you up for stars know how long, destruction of government property and trespassing being the least of your worries. I thought you would have learned responsibility after these 3 years, but you're a sorry." Kase slammed his fist onto the desk, the lantern light quivering and casting strange shadows on his father's face. "I am the best stars-blasted pilot you have, and I did that without your shocking help." The resounding slap reverberated through Kase's skull as his body listed sideways from the momentum of his father's hand. He caught himself on the edge of the desk and blinked away tears. Harlan's voice dropped to a temperature colder than the snow falling in the Narden Range. "You're dismissed from the cruise on my orders as Lord Capitan. I'm through with you disgracing the Shackley name. Now get out of my sight." Kase's eyes still stung, but he gritted his teeth. His blood heated, his rage simmering near the surface, scorching, burning. A small voice in the back of his head told him to stop, flames igniting at the edge of his memory, their orange glow hovering in the night sky. That would happen again if he retaliated. And that wasn't something he could return from. Instead, he spit on the floor and stalked from the room, out of the manor, and into the empty streets of Kaivena. Chapter 2. You Need Me. Hallie. Hallie Walker cracked her knuckles through protective gloves. The image of her aging yet eccentric professor traversing the wilds of neighboring Cereline just to get his hands on the document before her made her smile. She allowed herself a silent chuckle. Definitely not Professor Christie's style, but it would have made for an interesting epic. If he had, the university might have commissioned a marble bust of him to display like the others lining the ends of the library's towering shelves. It would have certainly earned him a spot next to General Mackenzie, the man who'd led the life ships from First Earth to Yalvara. That is, if the document had anything worthy scrawled upon it. Hallie's gloved hands and golden eyes would decide that. The first half of the document hadn't been anything groundbreaking, only a bit about Yalvan cultural history before the landing. Hallie already knew about those bits. While it was too early in the year to need a proper fire, the one in the university library's hearth added a lovely crackling that echoed off two tall ceilings and wooden beams. Sunlight through stained glass depicting the heroics of the first settlers painted pictures across the sparsely populated tables, tucked between bookshelves so tall one needed a ladder to reach the top shelf. Hallie thought it poetic that the first victory against the ruthless Searles danced across the parchment in front of her. They were the ones who had chased off the Yalvs 2 decades before. She squinted a little and tried to translate the next few words. Stars. The discoloration and faded symbols were one of the many ways Hallie could tell the parchment was ancient. Really, it was remarkable her professor had acquired such an important historical artifact as this. Grabbing a cheap and slightly stubby charcoal pencil, she scratched out a rough translation in her open notebook. Both only cost her a half-bronzer total at the market. Some vendor wanted to get rid of the notebook in particular, and Hallie gladly took it off his hands, even if the binding didn't want to hold all the pages. She just hoped it lasted until the end of the semester. Hallie blew her auburn hair out of her eyes. Blasted pins didn't keep her 2 slick locks in place long enough. Of course, her mother would have chastised her, saying she hadn't done her hair up properly, that a lady's bun was free of stray hairs, tighter than a miner's grip, and decorated with fine braids and twists. But her mother wasn't here, was she? Bless the stars for that. As the wisps weren't cowed by the force of wind, she dug her fingers into her hair, keeping the offenders at bay, and kept writing. They came with sparking. The next word wasn't as clear. She peeked around at the other students near her. Each bore down on their documents like bees to mountain lilies. With a sigh, she looked at the faded word once more. Could it be science? Maybe. It might also mean something unnatural with nature. Good stars, could Professor Christie have not found this earlier? While her mumblings were too loud for the library room, not even one of her fellow university scholars moved, except she was sure she noticed an eye roll from the glossy-haired girl next to her. That would have been her friend Petra, who Hallie swiftly kicked underneath the table. Only the jingle of Petra's jeweled bracelet told Hallie she'd gotten her point across. It wouldn't do well to get kicked out of the library again this week. Hallie grinned. With a tapping of her pencil, she inspected the Yalvan document once more. Professor Christie had assigned each of her classmates a piece of the artifact, hoping they'd get some good practice in. While Hallie loved the man like a grandfather, she was certain he simply didn't want to translate it himself. Not that he was lazy, but with each passing year, Hallie feared his eyesight grew worse. Then again, Hallie didn't mind being tasked with this. That meant she would know the secrets of the ancient natives before just about anyone else in Jade. She didn't know why Professor Christie hadn't handed the entire document to her. She was top of his Yalvan language level 3 class. Translating Yalvan into Common came to her almost naturally. Leaving a small blank for the words she couldn't quite make out and copying the nearly illegible symbols below that, she moved on. We welcomed them to our destruction. Yalvara is not meant for man. Interesting. Hallie finished scrawling the last word and tapped her pencil on Petra's parchment. The young woman looked up, her thin obsidian eyes hard. What is it you want? Are you trying to get us kicked out again? Hallie swiveled her head to where the librarian dealt with some sort of issue at the desk. We're fine. Madame Terry is busy with a first-year student who seems to have lost a book. Your point? Hallie shoved her notes across the table and pointed to the blank and the symbols beneath. "I can't seem to figure out this word here. It's too faded. Will you take a look?" Petra raised a slim brow but nodded. "Don't know why you're asking me. You're loads better at this than I am." "Except my superior brains can't decipher something not there," Hallie said with a grin, and passed over her portion of the ancient text as well. Petra took it in her own gloved hands, squinting and chewing on her lip as she inspected it. She smoothed non-existent stray hairs back into her immaculate coal-colored lady's bun. A dark stain had smeared across the fingertips of Hallie's left glove. Blast! Probably from her pencil. Hopefully the old hag of a librarian she borrowed them from wouldn't mind terribly. The woman already hated Hallie after the incident earlier this week. Eyeing Petra's fountain pen, Hallie shoved down her resentment. If only she hadn't had to work her way through school after that first year at the university, maybe she could afford to be so luxurious in her choice of writing utensils. Not that she blamed Petra herself, of course. That was just the way things were, though it didn't make the bitterness any sweeter. Regardless, Hallie would rather be poor in Kaivenna than wealthy back home in Stoneset. Petra's eyes narrowed further as she chewed on the end of her pen. Must be nice to have the privilege of chewing up the end of one's writing utensils, as Daddy could buy another when the teeth marks became visible. Hallie cracked her neck and stroked the pocket watch hanging around her neck. She sucked in a few long breaths, an attempt to calm the pins and needles pricking her chest. The pocket watch had never worked properly, even when it had belonged to her twin brother Jack, or their father before him, or even their grandfather, if family legend was to be believed. Jack had tried to fix the heirloom many times, but even as skilled with his hands as her twin was, he hadn't been able to make it work. Hallie didn't exactly mind. Besides, the engravings on the cover intrigued her the most. Worn down with time, they were somewhat difficult to make out, but in the right light she could just see the picture they painted. The wide face detailed a city Hallie had never seen before. Granted, she'd only ever been to Jade's capital, Kaivenna, but the city didn't match any depicted in old First Earth storybooks either. A castle-esque structure sat tucked into the side of a mountain, with other buildings dripping like rain all the way to the valley, each with oddly slanted roofs building to thin points. She rubbed her thumb once more across the memorized scene. Breathe in, breathe out. This was her last year of school, and after graduating she'd open a school in Lower Kaivenna and would never have to think of home again. Petra blew air out of her lips in a very unladylike fashion, which interrupted Hallie's thoughts. She looked over at her friend. "What would your mother say if she heard you make that noise?" "She wouldn't, because I'd conveniently blame it on you," Petra said, her words laced with subtle mirth. "She thinks you're a bad influence." Hallie shrugged and leaned her elbows on the table, another rub of the pocket watch taking the unintended sting out of Petra's words. "I try ridiculously hard to be. Now, I assume you can't figure it out either." Her friend shook her head. "My guess is as good as yours. If Ellis were here, he might be able to figure it out with those eagle eyes of his, but for now we're stuck." Hallie took back her sketchpad and the document. Ellis completed their trio, but his mother had needed him for a function of some sort that afternoon. Probably one involving too expensive tea, coattails, and dignified handshakes. All were pretentious in Hallie's opinion. Before either of them could say anything else, the clock tower struck the hour. The university had built the stone monolith keeping the capital on schedule nearly 3 centuries prior. University legend said the Yalves had aided its construction, and the High Council, which was comprised of the 2 head guardsmen, 3 elected stradats, and Lord Capitan, had kept one of the Yalves captive, forcing him or her to work the bells ever since. Yet Hallie had met the bell ringer in her first year, or should she say, bell ringers. The university employed street urchins from the lower city to ring the bells at the appropriate times. Hallie counted each peal unconsciously as she stared at the impossible word. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then silence. 4 o'clock. Didn't realize it was so late. Wasn't there something— Mother of Ash! She squealed, leaping up, her chair toppling over behind her. The librarian and every student turned toward her, the former giving her the nastiest look, with eyes narrowed to slits and nostrils flared. Crashing stars! For all the moons in heaven, what— Petra started. Hallie shoved her sketchpad and pencil into the satchel and righted the chair. I was supposed to be at work at 3! Oh, stars, Jess will be so— She flung the satchel over her shoulder. The contents slapped her leather-clad back. Will you take the document and tell Professor Christie I'll give him my report tomorrow? Petra took the artifact before Hallie upended the table. I'll pick you up at the quarter after 7 to eat before the play? Hallie nodded and took off towards the front of the room, ripping off her gloves and flinging them at the librarian's desk and ignoring the woman's low growl. Hallie didn't care. She'd already been late twice that week. Trying to ignore the thought of the bookshop owner's quiet, disappointing words as he berated her once more, she fled through the streets of the capital, praying Jess didn't fire her this time. The bell atop the bookshop door clanged and nearly fell off its perch as Hallie blew into Beckham Books on Callan Street 20 minutes later. The lacy shirt underneath her jacket clung to her back awkwardly, and auburn strands stuck to her face during her mad dash to work. She'd sprinted through alleyways and side streets all the way to the lower city, as she knew without a doubt the marketplace and main thoroughfare would be full to the brim that time of day. Stars! I still need to pay for next semester, and if I lose this job, oh, stars! I know I'm late, and I know I swore I wouldn't be, but I didn't hear the blasted bells until 4, and I was translating something in the library. Her words came out jumbled as she wove her way through the 2 close shelves and to the back, where Jess, her employer, waited. But the look in his brown eyes said it all. Hallie stopped short, her breath coming in sharp bursts. I'm so sorry. Unable to stay upright any longer and face the disappointment lacing Jess's features, she bent over, hands on her knees and satchel falling off her shoulder onto the floor. I came as fast as I could. I only got to wave at Edward as I passed him, but I did stop and give Gemma a copper. She hadn't sold any daisies, I don't think, and I— Who is Edward? Jess's voice was tired and slow, like each word trudged through the mountain snows. Hallie glanced up, a bead of sweat perched on the lip of her brow. You know, he's the beggar with that really long red beard that sits on the corner of Brooks and Flincher. And I'm pretty sure he combs that beard of his because it's not tangled and matted like some— Jess rubbed his cheek, then the smooth skin on top of his head. Hallie, this is the 3rd time this week you've been late, and the 7th time this month alone. Hallie straightened, the fingers on her right hand finding her pocket watch. A tingling started in her chest, mixed with heat that felt like the fire in the library hearth. But you know how hard this semester is. I've told you that the workload is much heavier, like Tuesday with my professor holding me back, and then today with the translations, and... She took several deep breaths. It wasn't Jess's fault, even if he didn't quite understand. In the silence, Jess spoke, his voice hard, though not in the way her mother's got whenever she chastised Hallie for ruining yet another skirt playing out in the spring rains. I do realize this, yet Evie and I have a business to run, Hallie. If this was a one-off thing every so often, I wouldn't mind, but you're late at least once a month, if not more, even in your summer months, and mainly because you get distracted on your way over. After our conversation Tuesday, I thought I'd made myself clear. The tingling in Hallie's chest turned to hot, flaming knives. I know I said I wouldn't be late again, and I didn't. I'm so sorry. I just... And what you said about the probationary period, Tears hotter than the blasted sun clouded her vision, but she blinked them back. I'll not be late again. I swear on Tovo's name. Jess rubbed his cheek once more, and the light from the chipped electric lanterns hanging from the ceiling reflected off his bald head. His cheeks pinked even more under his copper skin as he looked at her again. "You shouldn't swear by Tovo unless you want the gods after you." He swallowed as his eyes scanned the shelves. His next words were quiet. Alli had to lean in to hear each one. "We agreed that if you were on time for every shift the rest of the month, Evie and I would rethink your probation." He stopped, inspecting the haphazard book piles, and looked her square in the eye. "But I have to go through with what I said." Hallie's fingers ached from gripping the pocket watch too tightly, and at least one tear liberated itself from her hold. "You can't fire me. You can't do that. Not now. I promise you by the stars and moons in the sky, I'll be on time tomorrow and through the rest of the month. You can count on me. I'm the only one who knows where the Shakespeare books are. Connor can't do this all by himself, and neither can you. You need me." Heart pounding in her ears, she took more deep breaths. "And you and I both know Connor can't take on more hours." Jess came around the corner at last and put both hands on her shoulders. He gave them a light squeeze. "I'm truly sorry this had to happen this way, but like I said earlier, I have a business to run, and sometimes I have to make difficult decisions." His smile was sad and droopy, as if melting in the summer heat, yet the air was starting to turn crisp. "Finish out today, and I'll bring your last pay sum down when we close at 6. I'm certain you'll be able to find something before the end of the month. Maybe even talk to Owen." As if Alli would tell Professor Christie she'd gone and lost the job he'd helped her get a year ago. She swallowed the pain and tightened her fists. "Fine." Jess gave her one last squeeze before turning away and limping towards the stairs. His knee, an old injury from the war 2 decades earlier, seemed to bother him more and more lately, but at that moment Alli couldn't find the strength to care. Once the upstairs apartment door opened with a creak and closed with a thud, Alli finally made her way around the counter. She dropped her satchel underneath. Working her lips to try and keep the breakdown contained, she fell onto the stool and collapsed into her arms. "It's all right. It's okay. Maybe someone at the university needs an assistant. The librarian?" Another few tears leaked from her eyes, dripping down the bump on her nose from where she'd broken it nearly 3 years prior, and plopping silently onto the rough wood of the shop counter. "I still get to go to the theater tonight, and Ellis said he's taking us to that tavern he's been raving about the last month or so. I'll worry about finding a job tomorrow." She grabbed a stack of books, needing to be put away. Part of her wanted to fling them against the wall, but she settled for slamming them on the shelf in random places. Each thud drowned out the conversation replaying in her head. Bless the soul and stars of whoever walked into the shop during her shift. Chapter 3. Clearest Sapphire. Kase. Kase spent the next day flitting around Kaivenna, avoiding the manor at all costs. Whether it was a good or bad sign that the Lord Capitan hadn't sent soldiers after him yet, he didn't know. His gut told him Harlan hadn't wanted to draw attention to the fact that his youngest son was a problem, a disgrace. But Kase no longer cared. His father could go blast himself to the moons. After failing to finish a mug of ale at one of the lower city's seedier taverns, he inspected Kaivenna's busiest market square, various wares flashing between patrons like dusty electric bulbs in the early evening light. Running his fingers through his mess of curls, he leaned against a tall building, an apothecary, judging by the sharp scent of lavender and some chemical wafting out every time the door opened. Kase dug into the back pocket of his trousers and tugged out a piece of crumpled parchment. Smoothing it with his thumb, he squinted and tried to decipher the messy cursive blurred by his own sweat. Callan Street, apartment 303, Lower Kaivenna. He scanned the colorful market, attempting to figure out which direction Callan was, but apparently the lower class didn't believe in street signs. Ridiculous. It didn't help his foul mood. He pushed off the wall with a soft scraping noise and fought through the mass of shoppers. The capital had grown over the millennium since the landing, but the city's population had erupted in the last decade. He'd read more than one scholar attributing that growth to the 8th Industrial Revolution, which wouldn't be the first time they'd compared something here to distant First Earth. But that place of legends no longer existed. All Jade had left were stories and crumbling artifacts, and all these blasted people jostling him. If only he could get out of the city and live somewhere in the mountains. That'd be nice. He'd take all his favorite books and read them under the uninterrupted blue sky. One day. As he stuffed the slip of parchment away and wove past hagglers of all shapes and sizes and the rich, pungent scent of cooking spices, his eyes caught on a blade seller's wares. He paused and grabbed a scabbard with a decadent flame pattern. It reminded him of something Beowulf might have carried as he went to slay Grendel. 15 gold tenors for that, the vendor said as Kase unsheathed the knife. He inspected the strange, bronze-colored metal. That Zuprium comes all the way from Sol Adrid itself. All the way from the Cerulean capital? Right. Did people believe that rubbish? It barely took a moment for him to spot the telltale freckles of a well-done fake. Life must be difficult for blade sellers, seeing as electro-pistols were the weapon of choice. Still didn't excuse lying to people. Kase sheathed the knife and bent down to the man's height. You and I both know this is a Rubicon imitation not worth 3 bronzes. I suggest you be honest with patrons, or you might find yourself explaining to the watch how you got all the way to Cerulean and back with your head intact. An empty threat, seeing as he couldn't go tell the watch on the man without turning himself in to his father. Minor details. The man gulped. Yes, no need. I'm trying. My family was starving. Please don't tell the watch. I won't do it again. Swear on Tovo's name. Fishing a couple of bronzers from his quickly depleting money pouch, Kase straightened. He'd need to sneak back to the manor soon and steal more. Pushing the coins across the table, Kase leaned in. If I ever hear of you lying to a customer again, I will tell the watch. Got it? The man snatched the coins as Kase stood, flicking invisible dust off his shoulder. Now, which way is Callan Street? The man pointed a trembling hand to the west side of the square, and the afternoon sunlight burned Kase's eyes as he looked that direction. Trudging half-blind through the crowds, he put up a hand to block it as he moved away from the blade seller's stand. If the man kept his word about lying, all the better, but he wasn't the only one conning people. Jade was on the verge of collapse, even if no one knew the extent of it. The influx of even more refugees from Tev Rubica didn't help the city's already bulging population. Kase moved past a peach-colored awning and nodded to the daisy seller wearing a tattered headscarf. Turning the corner, he froze. Many buildings in Kaivenna were constructed of whitewashed stone with hints of Zuprium mined in the Nardens, but here on Callan, faded black marks crawled up the walls like macabre floral creepers, marring the bricks and sending a shudder down his spine. How many reminders of the past would he face this week? First the fight with Harlan, now this? Shocks. The fires that had ravaged much of the city 3 years ago were burned into his memory. Some parts were worse off than others. The upper district only had a few manors catch flame, but several sectors of the lower city had been an inferno with their cheap wooden housing. Just breathe. Bending over, Kase put a hand on the corner shop's rough stone wall and calmed his racing heart. When his brother had given him the address before the Greenies' accident, he hadn't thought twice about where it'd be located. He didn't know the lower city well enough to realize, and Zeke couldn't have known how much the marks would affect him. He squeezed his eyes shut and took another deep breath. "Stop being a stars idiot. You're making a fool of yourself." Eyes opening once more, he passed the black stains. It was a quiet lane and sparsely populated, the perfect place for his brother to live. Smaller shops dotted the street with their signs jutting out above the doors. Soren's General Supply, Tailor for Hire, and Beckham Books. A bookstore? Kase smiled. He'd been searching for Homer's Iliad, specifically Marassy's translation. It might have been useless now, as he had no plans to return to Shackley Manor, but buying a book, any book, Marassy or not, would make him feel better. And it would help clear his head so he could better coerce Zeke into lending him proper clothes for the theater that evening. The hanging sign creaked in the brisk breeze like the loose hatch underneath his old hovership. He flinched a little at that thought. If Harlan got his way, there'd be no hovership, old or new. No, he wouldn't let the blasted Lord Capitan stop him. The crews were an autonomous branch of the Jadian military, so Kase had more freedom than others, but that was all about to change. Kase needed a way to absolve his guilt or prove himself to his father. He shook his head, laid a hand on the shrinking money pouch at his waist, and pushed open the bookshop door. A bell pealed above him as he shut the door, and he breathed in the musty scent of decaying parchment. The smell calmed his nerves enough that he could almost forget the scorch marks outside. But that small amount of peace didn't last long. Of course, it never did. A soft curse broke his reverie, a flustered feminine voice. "Stars, welcome. Have a look around, but make it quick. We close in 10 minutes. Furrowing his brow, Kase checked his pocket watch, the parchment from earlier fluttering to the ground. It was just past 6. He scooped up the parchment and shoved it into the opposite pocket. In a moment, the owner of the voice appeared from the back. The first thing he noticed was her outfit, trousers tucked into calf-high boots instead of long skirts. It was a recent trend and one his mother frowned upon. Kase didn't care either way, though his sister Anna would have liked the new fashions. She'd always hated lacy dresses tangling around her ankles. Kase swallowed hard. Those thoughts were best left forgotten beneath the ash. The second observation was the girl's eyes, which reminded him of golden honey on toast. Should have eaten dinner beforehand instead of trying to drink that ale. Ignoring his stomach grumbling, he stuffed his timepiece away. Her gaze narrowed at his clothing. "And I mean 10 minutes. Shocks and stars, what did he do to earn such a glare?" Kase glanced down at his pilot's jacket. His clothes were stiff from the rain, the same he'd worn during the bike fight. At least his jacket hid the blood. Kase ran a hand through his curls and frowned. "Is that how you treat paying customers?" "Depends on if you actually pay or not, doesn't it?" She swiped bits of dark auburn hair out of her eyes. Little pieces had escaped the messy bun. "Please let me know if you require any help." "Thank you so kindly. The service here is just so blasted lovely." The girl's face clouded before she spun on her heel and disappeared behind one of the shelves. 8.5 minutes! With a huff, he entered the labyrinth of tomes and crackling parchment. Really, it was abhorrent to have so little time to explore a place such as this, but at least he had money. No one would refuse a paying customer. Many of the books looked like an inebriated patron had stacked each shelf. Shameful. He passed by 2, finding nothing of note. Maybe he wasn't meant to find a copy of Marassy. He certainly wasn't traveling all the way to Tevrubica. There's civil war? No, he'd keep looking. Maybe he could ask the kindly attendant if she knew where he might find one. Cautious of speeding up his time, he peeked around the end of the first row. The girl organized some books and muttered under her breath just low enough that he couldn't hear. Kase narrowed his eyes. He loved a good sparring match if it sharpened his wit and tongue, but her attitude was borderline rude. For once, he hadn't done anything to deserve such treatment. She wasn't terrible to look at, though. Her long nose had been broken at least once, but that only enhanced her soaring cheekbones. When she turned back to the desk, Kase darted back into the maze and searched the next shelf. He sent up a quick prayer to find his quarry sooner rather than later. He'd come in to find solace, yet the time crunch only made him feel worse. Maybe he should leave and continue to his brother's apartment. He worked his jaw for a moment and pulled out his watch once more. He still had plenty of time before he needed to head to the theater, and the more time he wasted here meant less time for Zeke to interrogate him about the previous night's events. As he brushed his fingers over the spines on the next shelf, his eyes caught on a flash of gold. Squeezed between two monstrous volumes, the shining, embossed letters of Iliad glinted at him. With a soft grunt, he tugged on the book, keeping the others from tumbling onto his head with his other hand, and flipped it open, glossy pages sliding through his fingers. He scowled. This was a more recent edition, written in the Queen's Rubicon. While most living among the nations of Yalvara spoke Common, a sect in Tev Rubica still spoke Rubicon. They'd been the ones who'd instigated the war to begin with. Blasted rebels. The war led desperate citizens to try anything to bring in a few coppers. Kase didn't blame them, but the quality of products was terrible. This specific version of Iliad lacked several elements from the original epic. He rifled through the rest of the shelf to no avail and moved on. How did anyone find anything in there? Was there not a section dedicated to ancient classics? He inspected each shelf for any sign of what it might hold. A few Rubicon copies of other novels littered the shelves. Great shocks, why would any bookshop carry those? A red, leather-bound book sat upon a large volume about plant life in Cerulean and others whose titles had rubbed away. Kase pulled it out and smoothed a hand over it, wiping the grime onto his trousers. They were already filthy anyway. "Is this an authentic Sond?" he whispered to himself. He didn't recognize the cover itself, with its embossed title written in some language Kase wasn't sure of, and an imprint of a large archway. He opened the book, coughing as a cloud of dust took flight from the pages. This place is a health hazard. What it was, he didn't know, but it was rare, maybe even an original Sond, a man from the landing who'd written dozens of books about their journey from First Earth to Yalvara. Good stars, his mother would love this, whatever it was. It might even have something to do with the Yalvs. Most copies of anything to do with Yalvan culture had been lost once they'd disappeared. Some said they'd died off. Either way, only the University of Jade had any copies of Yalvan texts. By his brother Jove's standard, their mother had far too many books, yet not enough for Kase's. He ran a hand over the cover and mysterious title once more. In fact, the gift might propel him past Zeke as her favorite son. With another cough, he tucked it under his arm. But he was never going back to the manor. Blast. Maybe Zeke could give it to her? Double blast, his brother would get the credit. He wandered a little more and found the young woman reading an enormous book at the counter. Was reading it worth the backache from carrying it around? Odds were it was. She looked up at his polite cough. "Do you need assistance?" Kase ground his teeth at her tone. Maybe he should have just gone to Zeke's. Your shelves would benefit from more organization, I'd say. She set down her book, pages rustling. She arranged her face into a smile, though to Kase it was more a pained grimace, as if she knew she should be a friendly shopkeeper, but she'd much rather dice him to bits. Even her voice sounded fake. "Again, I would be happy to help you locate any texts you desire in the next 5 minutes, because we close, and I won't be selling any books to you after that." She gave him the once-over again. "No matter how much money you might have." "Oh, no, I'm fine, just enjoying my time here at this establishment. Good thing I don't have asthma." He coughed and swatted imaginary dust out of the air. "Though I wouldn't complain if you shelved all the books by topic." "Oh, thank you for your insight. I don't own the shop, but your time limit is now down to—" She brushed her fingers across a locket hanging from her neck and looked to the dust-clouded clock on the wall. The second hand needed oil, judging by its subtle creaking. 3 minutes. I'd give you that entire time, but I'm not in a forgiving mood. You have 2.5 instead." Kase held up the rare book and placed it on the counter. Hopefully he would be able to buy it with the small sum in his pouch. Blasted girl probably didn't know what it might have been worth anyway. "Most other shops close around 7 at the earliest. What makes this one so special?" "We're always closed this early." She pressed her fingers into the countertop. "Now, is that all you're looking for?" Kase cleared his throat as he drew a finger through the dust on the nearest shelf, because he couldn't ever help himself. "I'm in the market for a copy of Marossi's Iliad translation, but the monstrous volume you've got there intrigues me." Her nostrils flared, the only sign that his silent insult about the dust landed. He would have to try harder. Her words came out stilted. "We don't have any Iliad translations other than a Rubicon copy." "I saw. Shame they leave out Achilles dragging Hector's body around. That's one of the best parts." "I know, it's rather—" She caught herself and scowled. "Is that all? Just that one?" "How about your book?" Kase tried to move closer, but she picked up the text and tucked it clumsily to her chest. He grinned. "I'll give you a silver 5 for it." "Gracious day, my textbook isn't for sale." A female student at the university? Rare indeed. Impressive, and if she hadn't hounded him about leaving, he might have told her so. "Oh, shame you have to work. Paying your way through school, I assume?" Kase caught a peek at the author on the spine. His stomach flipped unpleasantly, and he frowned, twisting the ring around his finger. "Huh, Owen Christie's a bit of an old fart, to put it kindly. I'd set that aside, you'll thank me later." The girl's ears reddened as she slammed the book on the counter. The action sent a charcoal pencil to the floor. She tried to catch it before it fell, but failed. She scooped it up and clutched it in her fist. "I see you must be one of those elitists who believe us poor peasants worship the privy you defecate in. Well, Lord Pilot, if you'd deigned to read the sign outside, you would have known we closed at exactly 6, and 10 minutes was generous since I accidentally left the door unlocked." She waved the pencil around like a knight brandishing a sword. "Sign? What sign?" Heat flooded the back of his neck. Who was this girl to make such ridiculous assumptions about him? Most people at least waited half an hour before deciding he was a cocky dullcop. "Don't lose your temper. You'll regret it. Remember what happened last time." "So, you're rude and incompetent? Ha! What a wonderful employee you are! In that case, I'll leave you to your rotting ramshackle dump. Don't expect me back." He stuffed the red leather book on a nearby shelf. Stupid blasted. He whisked through the shelves, coughing as the hem of his jacket upset layers of dust. But before he made it to the door, she shouted, "I bite my thumb at you, sir!" He stopped. Of all the things she could have said, she'd chosen to insult him with Shakespeare? If he hadn't been so frustrated, he might have laughed. Instead, he slammed the door and headed off toward Zeke's. Blasted girl. Finding himself at his brother's apartment, a short walk from the bookshop, Kase threw his stiffened, blood-stained clothing onto the spotless floor and ignored how terribly it stuck out. Zeke kept a ridiculously clean house. Must have been the soldier in him. After a quick wash and a dash of woodsy fragrance, he shrugged into a borrowed, broad-shouldered shirt and used a leather belt to keep the trousers from falling to his ankles. Not the best, but it would work. He was thankful Zeke had even let him in the door. Otherwise, he'd have to go in his old clothes, and the steward might not have allowed him in the theater for the smell. He eyed his blood-soaked trousers and gave them a swift kick for good measure. As for his pilot's jacket, it lay across the bed and out of harm's way. Kase was about to grab the tie from the nearby chair when voices sounded down the hall and shattered the small piece he'd found in the last half hour. Glancing into the mirror set on the wash-basin, Kase ruffled a few curls as his eldest brother Jove flew in like a maelstrom, eyes wild. Zeke caught the door before it could bang into the wall and shut it quietly. Had Zeke snitched and told Jove where Kase was hiding? Traitor! His older brothers were both strong-jawed and broad-shouldered, but sparse patches of black stubble spotted Jove's cheeks. Apparently, he was trying to start a beard. Almost 25 and not able to grow proper whiskers. Just terrible. While Kase was sure he could produce enough facial hair to reach his ankles at his mature age of 21, he preferred to keep his face clean-shaven. Food might get caught in his mustache if not. Ridiculously embarrassing. Zeke, on the other hand, wore his face clean and his hair shaved on the sides, the longer locks on top smoothed back toward his crown. "Hiding, are we?" Kase knew Jove was one step from losing his cool by the way his nostrils flared. Jove didn't wait for an answer before launching into another question. "Where have you been?" "Nowhere important." Kase jerked the blue silk tie around the back of his neck and did up the knot. Anna's dainty ring on his pinky finger glinted in the light filtering through the open window. "Just wandering around the city, then?" Jove's ears flushed from the color of parchment to ruby red in seconds. "Or perhaps chasing Lavinia Richter's skirts?" Kase finished up his tie, biting back another sharp retort. He hadn't spoken to Lavinia since she'd gotten engaged to that stars idiot from Tev Rubica, but Jove was too busy with his new high guardsman duties to pay attention to Kase's life. As an ultra-important member of the Watch, he believed he had the authority to boss everyone around. Zeke cleared his throat and put a hand on Jove's shoulder. His sturdy face was as calm as a cloudless day. "Let's be calm about this." "I am calm," Jove growled. Kase snorted, and Jove shook off Zeke's hand. "Kase, after what you did last night, I didn't do anything." Jove threw his hands in the air as Zeke rubbed his eyes. The latter spoke first, his voice soft, almost placating. "There's a pilot fighting for his life in the city infirmary. The guild medics don't know if he'll ever walk again." Kase glared. "You think I meant for it to happen? Shucks, Zeke, it wasn't my fault whether you believe me or not. And on top of that, they brought the blasted Lord Capitan into this, and now I'm off the cruise, so I don't shocking care what either of you have to say about it." "Listen." Jove scratched at his budding beard, the irritation leaving his face. "I didn't come to yell at you, I swear, though your attitude needs a major adjustment as usual. What did you come here for, if not to berate me for besmirching the family name?" Kase crossed his arms and went to the window. "And my attitude is fine, thank you very much." Jove merely sighed. "The Watch would like you to join a mission." Kase laughed, still not facing the other two. "Your orders are probably still on the esteemed Lord Capitan's study floor." "Kase?" Zeke's voice was steady, annoyingly so. "Listen to him. It might be the only way out of the mess you've made." Kase gritted his teeth and breathed sharply out his nose. "I didn't do anything wrong. I only took the blame because I thought I was the only one who could without getting disciplined." Zeke's jaw shifted a little, as did his feet, but he didn't say anything. Jove spoke instead. "Will you just listen? I'm trying to help you." "Fine. Talk." Jove took a deep breath, fingers twitching like he was imagining strangling something, probably Kase's neck. "Let's go to the parlor and sit, shall we?" Zeke asked, opening the door once more. Both Kase and Jove followed, each refusing to acknowledge one another. The parlor wasn't nearly as grand as the one at Shackley Manor. The apartments were rented to those of higher station in the military, but it was cozy enough with its plush armchairs and soft electric lighting. Kase knew Zeke was proud of it with his recent promotion and pay upgrade to lieutenant colonel. He was only overshadowed by Jove, who'd been given the title of High Guardsman by the Watch, the top rank in the intelligence and police service. A prestigious honor, especially for someone as young as Jove. Both brothers' accomplishments made Kase's promotion to full pilot pale in comparison. He slumped into a chair, the material of his too large shirt bunching up at the shoulders. Jove leaned forward, elbows on his knees and fingers pressed together. "I know Father's taken you off the mission, and he's still contemplating the charges." "I didn't—" Jove held up a hand, cutting Kase off. "For moon's sake, I didn't say I agree with him. But the mission is vital to Jade's survival, and I wouldn't trust it in any other pilot's hands. Your hover lead agrees with me. But you'll still have to deal with Father. And I will." Irritation laced Jove's voice. "If the mission's successful, we can drop the charges. You'd have proven yourself to him." Kase sat forward and ran both hands through his hair, mussing it further. They would drop the charges? Was Jove implying if he didn't go, he'd be facing them? And where would I have to go? Jove picked at his fingers. "I can't say right now. You'd not only be working with Zeke, but you'd also have Agent Ben Rice as your co-pilot." Kase's head shut up. "Skibbs said yes?" "Agent Ben Rice will be head of the mission, and Zeke will be along to represent the military's interests and be the on-crew medic, but you'll be the lead pilot." If Skibbs was going, it couldn't be too bad. He and Kase had been friends since they joined the hover crews together nearly 3 years ago. A year after joining, Skibbs decided he'd rather go into the Watch after a near-death experience with the highly corrosive Yalvar fuel. Kase didn't blame him. Having to strip naked on the airfield after getting the liquid on your clothes was embarrassing. Only one question left. "Would this give me back my place in the crews?" The words sounded forced, almost choked, but Kase couldn't help it. After everything he'd gone through in the last 24 hours, that was the weightiest thing bothering him. He just wanted to be free. And freedom meant a hover and the wide-open sky. Jove nodded. "I'll make it happen. I need you, Kase. We need you. You're the only one I trust to do this." Kase finally met Jove's gaze. Blue as the clearest sapphire, like his own. No matter how stern he seemed, Jove believed in him, trusted him to do the right thing, for some reason. He had always stepped in to protect him. Kase should feel more grateful. His brother knew all along Kase couldn't say no, because for all of Jove's faults, they were still brothers, and they trusted one another. After Anna's death, he, Zeke, and Jove were all the other had. Kase twisted the ring on his finger. This could be his only chance to escape. "All right." Kase didn't take his eyes off his brothers. Zeke's shoulders relaxed as Jove smiled, his eyes crinkling slightly at the edges. "You'll report to Professor Owen Christie's office on the university campus at 3 tomorrow for a briefing." Instantly, calm resignation burst into blazing rage. Bookshop girl hadn't known about his past, so her reading a book hadn't bothered him nearly as much, but Jove knew. "Owen Christie? Are you crazy?" "He's one of the most respected professors at the university," Jove barked. "I don't blasting care what he's done. He can go—" Zeke's voice rang out over the other two, his deep baritone stopping Kase mid-sentence. "You're not the only one who lost a sister, Kase." Kase snapped his mouth shut and gritted his teeth. "Why do you think this has anything to do with Anna?" Zeke rose from his chair and placed a hand on Kase's shoulder. "I know everything's been different since then, but you can't blame Professor Christie, or anyone." Kase shrugged off Zeke's hand and turned away. His heart thudded at the burning memory of that day. He worked his jaw, pleading for the screams to go silent. Neither of his brothers stopped him as he grabbed a bowler hat from the hook by the door and stifled his curls with it. He put a hand on the doorknob, not turning, trying to breathe through the memory. "Don't bring her into this." He opened the door and paused. "I'll be back late tonight, Zeke, if that's okay. And I'll show up to your meeting, Jove. Just make sure he isn't there." With that, he walked out, closing the door with a sharp snap. After the past 24 hours, Kase didn't want to think about the memories hiding in the darkest corners of his mind. He hired a cab and hopped in. He would enjoy the night at the theater. Then he could figure out his next steps.